Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
A recent 5-4 Supreme Court ruling could lead to nearly half of the state of Oklahoma being classified as Indian country. And yes, you did hear that right. Nearly half of the state of Oklahoma could be classified as Indian country as a result of a recent 5-4 Supreme Court ruling. What happened? What's going on? And what does it mean for Indian reservations around the country? Is it possible that large swaths of currently, quote unquote, American land could be given back to its original owners through old treaties? Well, that's what the Supreme Court was debating. That's what we're looking at today. And we're going to find out why you care, but you'll have to give us just a second because we couldn't begin a conversation on Oklahoma, the Indians, or states' rights without.
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, almost 200 years later, it's about time the Indians finally get a win. This, stems from the Trail of Tears back in 1830 when the Creek Indians were taken from their land in Georgia and put on a forced march by the U.S. government to Oklahoma, where they said they would be given land to create their own country. There's your quick historical perspective, and it's about freaking time.
Well, if you were wondering where Lance stands, you know now. It has been a while, actually, since Lance and I have gotten to do an episode specific to Indian-related issues in this country. I think the last one we did, Lance, was probably on the Indian Health Service, right? And why? And this is not meant in a harsh way at all, but I do think it's important because people probably tuned in today and they're listening and they're like, okay, we're talking about like half of the state of Oklahoma might be given back to the Indians. If I don't live in Oklahoma, and even if I live in Oklahoma and I don't live in that area, why the heck do I care about this, Lance? I mean, what, yeah, it sounds nice, I guess, but should I care? I mean, is there any other reason that I would care if I'm not in that area of Oklahoma? What's the larger picture?
There are other Indian reservations as well, all across the United States, maybe even in your state. If you get on your device and do a little research, you might find some in your state. It doesn't necessarily mean there may or may not be any native people living on that land, but they probably own some land somewhere in your state. It is an issue of states' rights as well, saying that the United States, no matter what, the U.S. government, no matter what, according to the Supreme Court, needs to hold up its end of a treaty. So there's another aspect of why you should be interested in this. And then it's also that maybe, just maybe, there is hope in finding some common ground here that we can start to do some good things for people that we have, in this case, the indigenous people who we have done some bad things for. And it might serve as an example to take care of some of the other problems that we have here in the United States. So if we watch this, then it works out very well because we're still in the very early stages here. As you said in the opening, half the state could become, this was only one. The Creek Indians brought the suit, but there are other Indian nations in Oklahoma who could be affected by this. So right now it's not half the state. But it sets the example, maybe sets a precedence that there is a way that we can find, to solve some of the problems that we have associated with all of us trying to live together under one roof and doing so peacefully.
Well, it sets that precedent, right? I mean, that's kind of like you said, it's the Creek tribe, right, that is the one that brought the suit, but now it opens the door to several other, at least 4 other tribes that have reservations or are supposed to have much larger reservations in the state based on their treaties that are also not being currently honored. And I think I just want to mention too, I hope that our listeners can really think about it. I think the issue of the way that we treat, Native Americans or Indians in this country, is one that is near and dear to Lance and I. It's something that I think both feel sick about, the way that our country has handled things there, because it does go unnoticed. But the Indian Health Service in and of itself is an example of how we continue to mistreat the people that were here long before us, whose land, we took basically without their okay, or, we quote unquote got their okay, but it was pretty much forced. It wasn't a willing okay. It was we've beat you back and we're going to murder the rest of your people if you don't sign on this dotted line and say that we agree to, basically your unconditional surrender. And here's exactly what you're going to do. So I think for a lot of reasons, Lance and I care a lot about it, because we are looking at, if something doesn't change, right, that there could come a time, in the next 100 years when there are no more reservations or Indians, because they've simply died off, because so often the land that they still occupy is terrible land. It's whatever somebody else didn't want.
By design, it's horrible land. It's not that they haven't done anything with it or that they have misused it. Every time something of value has ever been found on Indian land, the U.S. government has moved the Indians and taken from them whatever it was that was there of any value. And so, as you were getting ready to say, the land that they have is the land that nobody wants for whatever reason. And then we look at them and say, gee, look at these people. They're poor and they're uneducated and they can't seem to earn a living. Well, yeah, because you're putting them on pieces of property that have no value and no sustenance whatsoever. And then we never talk about them. And so, yes, they have health care, maybe somewhere on the reservation, but the reservation may be thousands of square miles in distance, and there's one little hospital. I mean, think of 2 or 3 counties in your state, or depending where you are, but think of being an hour away from medical facilities, which we've talked about as well in rural areas. And again, it's just another example of how we don't get outside of our own little world. My wife and I were talking about this just this weekend, is that we spent so much of our early adult life thinking, well, this is the way we live. This is the way everybody else lives. And as we've gotten older, we've come to more and more of an understanding of how lucky we are with what we have and what we've done, and how even in the United States, many, many people, more people than not, have what we have. And we feel very fortunate to have and want to give back as much as we can. But we need to do more of that, I think, as American citizens, that while we're striving to get what we want, or what we want out of life, which is, the freedom that we have to go after those kinds of things, we do owe it as a country to serve those around us as well, because it's only through that service that we all grow stronger and you can obtain what it is that you want.
I think too, Lance, it's important that people understand, because if you're out there listening, right, and you think about, well, why did we give them such terrible pieces of land? The obvious answer that might come to mind, right, is one of, well, we wanted the valuable land. And sure, there is a truth to that, but really the original motivation, when you go back and you look at history, right, is this is all by design. The purpose of signing these treaties, what the United States government was hoping is, we're going to stop losing our people. And what we'll do is force them onto this land. They'll realize how terrible the land is, and they will assimilate into our society, right? And we will essentially wipe out the Indian way of life in exchange for the American way of life. Because their assumption was, if we put them in these areas and they realize how bad it is, right, and they don't have access to anything and they have this terrible life, they're going to leave and go search for a better life. What they didn't count on, I think, Lance, was the pride that many of these people feel, and that, strong desire to keep their way of life intact, even if it means, right, staying in these places where truly the opportunity in most cases is non-existent. There is no vertical, it's you're on a horizontal plane, and that's pretty much where you stay, because again, like you pointed out, we've relegated them to these areas that generally are not close to anything. And the best opportunities are often, if they're allowed to have something like a casino, which not all of them even have, as a way to pull in some business and money. But other than that, it's kind of like some of the problems that small rural towns face, where there's just not a great way to stimulate the economy on an ongoing basis. And they face an even steeper uphill challenge, being a reservation and therefore sort of like an independent nation.
That pride that you talked about is something that we as American citizens should respect, because that's something we believe in, or we strive, or
we
try
say
to
we
teach,
believe in,
is to have pride in who you are and in your country and all of that. And so we should recognize that and embrace it rather than shun and put it to the side. But I don't know, this may carry over into the next segment, but we even perpetuated this assimilation of the native groups even further by, when they didn't assimilate, we then went to the reservation and took the children off the reservation and put them in, quote, Indian schools where they were taught by whites without their parents. I mean, imagine being 5, 6, 7, 8 years old and being taken from your family and being sent back east to go to school and only going home for a few weeks in the summer so that you could be taken from your culture and be taught, quote, the white man's ways so that you could assimilate. So, we couldn't assimilate your mom and dad or your grandma and grandpa, but we're going to take you up from a school age through high school, college, technical school, whatever. And we're going, and we can get into the stories of how those young people in schools were treated when they wouldn't assimilate. And yet here we are 100, 150 years after that was done, and we're still talking about the pride that these people have in their way of life. It's something I think we should all strive for and have that kind of pride in ourselves, in our families, and in our country.
Because, you had 6-year-olds that had enough pride in their way of life that they were standing up to brutal punishment in these schools. And like Lance said, it wasn't just, they're just going, it's bad enough, right, that they've been ripped from their parents and sent away to school and they're not able to see their family anymore. But they would cut their hair. They gave them different clothes to wear that these children had never seen before. They did all these things, right, as a way to completely dismantle the whole self-image they had in an effort to rebuild them as the type of people they thought they ought to be.
Well, before people think, they just cut their hair and did this and that. They would chain them to their desks. They would chain them to the tables, chain them to their beds until they would start to speak English, until they would eat the food that was put in front of them. You say, they fed them. Well, they didn't feed them what they were used to eating. Okay. We get into this. We need to sometimes stop and read and understand and learn what exactly was done, and then stop and ask ourselves, would we have put up with that kind of treatment?
What if American children today were taking?
Because we too much just sugarcoat it and say, that's what we did wasn't that bad, because we're really trying to help them out, learn to speak English and learn a trade, and they can become good American citizens. And we don't stop and look at some of the very drastic, awful things that we did to children just to assimilate them. And think about, what would my reaction be if somebody did that to my children? How would I respond? And then all of a sudden, as somebody once told me, a very bright person, walk a mile in another person's shoes before you judge them. Go through what they've been through, and then tell me what you did.
We got a lot more to come. What are the implications of this long term? What does it mean for us as a nation? Hopefully we've given you some stuff to think about so far, and there's plenty more to come. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Quote, "On the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise," Justice Gorsuch wrote. Forced to leave their ancestral lands in Georgia and Alabama, the Creek Nation received assurances that their new lands in the West would be secure forever. Congress has since broken more than a few of its promises to the tribe, but Thursday we hold the government to its word. That's the 5-4 majority decision of the Supreme Court of the United States of America, informing the United States Congress that if it wants to dissolve, it will have to do so and say so outright. It will not be given the easy route out of saying, well, we really haven't been recognizing this treaty, so therefore it's null and void. No, United States Congress, if you don't like it, you're going to have to take a vote and say that you want to rip this land away from these people. And to Lance's point, I think wherever you come down on this, right, whether you like the Supreme Court's decision or not, one of the reasons that we should all like it is the United States should be held to its word on contracts that we sign, regardless of if it's with Native Americans or other countries. We should take pride, right? We talked about that in the first segment. Take pride in the things that we promise to do and follow them through. And Congress shouldn't be allowed to weasel out of things just because it's inconvenient for them to stand up and say what they actually think, which, by the way, is what we pay them for in the first place, right, Lance? I mean, isn't that the whole point? Is they're supposed to go there, they're supposed to take votes. They're not supposed to just do things under the table and let crap slide and say, well, you know, we've kind of treated these people real terrible for a long time, so it's not a big deal. We'll just pretend like this treaty never existed. Well, you haven't done anything to get rid of it.
The rule of law. We're hearing a lot about the rule of law and law and order today, but here we go, right? Follow the rules. This is the rules that you signed. You haven't done anything to get rid of this rule, so the rule still applies. And like you said, Congress has the ability to change the rules, to change the law if they want to, but do your job. Follow the rules. That's all we're asking. On behalf of everyone out there in Oklahoma, according to the article, they say we're going to work together. That, you know, this case was brought, just a little historical reference here, this case was brought by the Creek Nation because they said the state of Oklahoma did not have the right to try them in the criminal courts in Oklahoma because this was federal land. Their deal, their life was made with the U.S. federal government. So therefore, any criminal action should be tried in federal court. They didn't say they wanted to be free. They didn't say they wanted to get out of everything. They just said, we want the proper people investigating us and trying us and then handing down verdicts on us. And that's what brought this to fruition. And nobody really knows yet where this is going to go. But the Supreme Court agreed and said, yeah, that's pretty much right, is that the federal government's in charge here because of the treaty. And, you know, then it's going to open up all these other things with businesses and taxation. But you know what? Like you said, that's a good thing. These are things that should have been being talked about anyway. And it's taken the court's action to get this now to be discussed among the powers that be, the business people, the government leaders on both sides, to now come to some kind of decision that will hopefully benefit everybody.
So it wouldn't be the state of us, Lance, though, right, if we don't share the opposing opinion, because it was a 5-4 decision. So, I mean, it was decided by one justice going to the majority side as opposed to the other way. So it very easily could have gone a different direction. This wasn't one of those larger decisions where we have a stronger majority. It was a one justice deciding factor.
The swing vote of the 5 was Judge Neil Gorsuch, that he's the one, and he's the one who we keep quoting in the majority opinion. He is the one who wrote the majority opinion.
What you might think from an ideological perspective that a justice might do, they do something different, and they usually have a justification for that.
Well, when they interview for the job, and I say that tongue in cheek, you know, when they go before the Senate Judiciary Committee and get voted on, they always tell us, always, every one of them tells us that I just read the Constitution and judge each case on its merits, and that you should not taint me as either liberal or conservative. I am just a Supreme Court justice who reads the law of the United States, reads the Constitution, and applies it fairly in every case. And so you see them, quote, switch from what they normally do. It shouldn't be that they switched. It's that they're doing their job. They're doing what they told us they would do when they were interviewed for the job in the Senate. and before they were voted on and given the job.
Well, and the dissenting opinion was written by Chief Justice John Roberts, where he says, quote, "The 5 tribes whose members collectively held at least 8,000 slaves signed treaties of alliance with the Confederacy and contributed forces to fight alongside rebel troops by conferring citizenship on tribe members and giving them a vote in the formation of the state. Congress incorporated them into a new political community. To hold otherwise may destabilize the governance of vast swaths of Oklahoma."
There you go. And that's where his problem is. It's like I had to come up with a reason. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm glad you're bringing that up. I'm going to let you say it. But, right, he goes in there with all the history, and then he has to throw that last little bit in there that really doesn't go with what he said in the first part, at least in my opinion. But go ahead.
Well, and, we are reading in defense of both the majority and dissenting opinion. We are reading tiny little excerpts here, right, of the full thing. So if you really do want to know the full rationale, you can read their multi-page opinions, but these are, again, what at least the Wall Street Journal in the article that we're using, they felt were the most important to highlight. And if you'd like to read it for yourself at thestateofus.org, it is linked, as these things always are. So please do take a look. But yeah, Lance, I think that's right what it comes down to. And I don't mean to minimize that either. We are talking about some huge implications here. When you look at the map, right, of the state of Oklahoma, it is not an exaggeration to say that if this is used as precedent, which, if I'm the Cherokee, for example, I'm absolutely going to use this as an opportunity to try to get land. When you look at the amount of land that would be, reclaimed by these tribes, you are talking about half of the landmass of Oklahoma. And notably, you're talking about pretty much the entire city of Tulsa. And I think that's probably the one that is the biggest portion of what are the implications, because we really haven't dealt with something like this before, where the state developed in such a way, right? The city of Tulsa developed in such a way that it was not, or it developed believing it was not part of an Indian reservation. And now all of a sudden, guess what? You are. So you have different laws. Your governing authority is different. You're basically in a different nation now. You're not in the United States anymore. There's all of these things that what do you do? Because at the same time, right? And Lance and I think, are big believers in this. We should absolutely do everything. And this is where it gets tricky, because this is where I know some people would be critical. Reasonable. And what do you mean by that? Well, we'll keep talking about that. But we should do everything that is as feasible as possible to make it better, in my opinion, right, for the Indians in this country, because we cannot fix it. There is nothing that we can do, right, that would reverse murdering millions. There's nothing that can be done to bring them back. So, and there's nothing that can be done to undo that pain and suffering for years and the thousands that have grown up in poverty. Nothing can be done that makes any of that go away. But what we can do is look in the mirror and do the hard things that say we have a responsibility to do something now, right? Because if we keep turning the other way and we keep saying, well, we're not the ones that made the problem. No, but we're the ones perpetuating the problem, right? We're the ones standing by and saying, we're not going to do anything because doing anything be too hard. And yeah, this is hard. There's big implications to a lot of people, a lot of American citizens, right? Who didn't sign up, who didn't ask for this, but nevertheless are going to be faced with some changes in their life, probably. And
that may or may not happen because, like you said, reasonable people are going to sit down on both sides and talk and really figure out what it is they want. And like I said, and that's why I brought up why the case was brought up, is that it's not about taking over land. They just wanted better treatment. So we'll see how it all plays out. But when we bring up our children, we tell them, tell the truth. You're always better off to tell the truth. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about what's going to happen down the road if you tell the truth. Well, isn't that what we're doing here? We're just saying, do what you're supposed to do the right thing. And okay, there may be some inconveniences. Some things might happen. They might not happen. But that's not why you make a decision. You don't take the easy way out. That's what I'm getting at here, is that we tell people, don't take the easy way out. Don't lie or cheat or steal or do all this because it's going to be, quote, easier. You tell the truth. If there's punishment involved or there's reciprocation or whatever, then so be it. But doggone it, own up to what you did, own up to what is right, and let's move on from that point, and everything's going to be better off. Don't keep lying, cheating, and stealing, because the only thing that does is make the problem worse. I at least was raised, and that I've spent time and again bringing up my children and nieces and nephews and everybody else. And I just thought that was kind of the way. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's time to, you know what? We're going to bring our children up so that we teach them how to cheat and lie and steal and get everything that they need. And that's all that matters is protecting number one, and whatever you can get out of something, that's what it's all about now. That's what life is all about. If it is, then it's a totally different country than I was brought up in.
How are you brought up? What do you teach to your children? And how far do Lance and I think we should take this? Well, that's the question that we're going to look at coming up. How far does this go? What are those implications? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The Supreme Court's made an interesting decision, one that could lead to up to half of the state of Oklahoma being returned as reservations to a number of different Indian tribes in the state. And these are all, why is this happening? Well, we've talked about that so far in the first and second segment, some of those implications. And I did want to say, Lance, because this occurred to me as you were talking at the end of the last segment, doing what's right, being honest. I think keeping in perspective that in this situation, doing what's wrong, right, doing the quote unquote unmoral thing, it's not just a matter of like hurting people's feelings, and not to minimize that, because I think, we should try to avoid being mean to other people emotionally when we can. But at the same time, we're talking about children, right? Growing up in poverty, and not like 10 or 20. We're talking about thousands, right? We're talking about a couple million people here that live in this country. That's what we're talking about when we talk about doing right and wrong right now. We have an opportunity to affect the future of a couple million people that live here. And by the way, right, whose ancestors were here long before us, and who are so proud that they would make a choice between continuing to live the life that they believe, right, to continue to practice their beliefs as opposed to assimilating into our culture. Would you do the same? If you were forced out of your home, right, and told you're going to go live here, and living in this place where there's no opportunity and where you're going to literally have to work for almost no food and no money, and there's no hope that life will really ever get any better, but you'll be allowed to continue living, quote unquote, the way you want, right, to practice your beliefs. But that's what you have to do in order to do it, right? I don't know if most of us would do that. I'm not sure that most people have that sort of resolve to not just say, no, I'll just give up my beliefs. I'll just do whatever you want, right? I'll just give in. I'd rather have the good life and give up some of those freedoms and those beliefs. And they're not making that choice, right? Now, granted, I do want to say, because I think this is important, a lot of them also don't feel like they have much choice either. Even if they wanted to leave, you have to have a means of leaving, right? You say, well, yeah, just get in your car and go. Well, a lot of them don't have cars, Lance. And even if they do, you have to have money to go somewhere unless you intend to live in your car, right? And then, well, yeah, you'll drive and you'll find a job, and maybe you have to sleep in your car for a few weeks, but you can get a place. Well, what do you need to get a job? Well, generally, most employers want to see some kind of job history. A lot of those people don't have that. So what are we expecting to happen here other than for them to die off the way that we currently do things? And that's why I just wanted to give that, Lance, because I think it's so important that we remember it's not just the theory of right and wrong, right? It has real impact.
Maybe that's the problem. Why we have that. Obviously, I think then, in my opinion, that's why we have the problem, is because people aren't willing to do that. They're not willing to sacrifice for what they believe in. And instead of honoring that and respecting that and taking care of those people, when I say taking care of, I'm not saying give a handout, but doggone it. Why can't we do more than, well, if you're one of the lucky ones, we'll open up a casino and we'll let you serve alcohol and bring people in to gamble, and you can work in these kinds of areas and make a little bit of money. Why aren't we trying to develop it? Why aren't we trying to give them more for people who have that kind of pride? Those are the kind of people that I want to surround myself with, because I want people who have that kind of pride, who want to take care of the land, who have a sense of family and of obligation and a belief system that they feel strongly about. So why push them away? Okay. We know why we did it at first, but why continue that? That to me is the question to ask. Why should we continue this? Why don't we then now start to open up because we're still doing it. When you talk about the pipelines and all the other things that are going on and fracking, well, we need that oil. So the heck with the indigenous people who live there. We really don't care that it might be unhealthy, because you can argue whether, well, is it healthy or unhealthy? And, there's anecdotal evidence on both sides of the fence there. But whether it is or not, why would we put them in harm's way again? We haven't changed our fundamental belief system in dealing with these people. That's why. And what you're pointing out is that these people are worth helping. They're worth bringing into society because they carry a lot of the characteristics and traits that we at least give lip service to in this country, that we respect and want people to have. We're the ones who have said, yeah, well, we're not going to take care of you, so I guess you got to go to court. And if you get your rights in court, now try to make us do it that way. And I don't know. It seems so basic and so obvious, like you said, that these are people who have a lot of qualities that we admire, or we say we admire in others, and yet we continue to push them to the side and not do anything to develop them and their culture.
I mean, think about, Lance, if the country of Mexico invaded our southern border, right, and took California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. They took those states and they said, those are Mexico now, right? And all the people that live there, right? You're all going to be Mexicans now. You're not Americans anymore. And then when the people were upset, right, that this had happened because they don't like it, then in order to get any rights, they have to go through the Mexican courts in order to get it, because this is Mexican territory now, right? Not United States. So you don't even get to use your own courts or your justice system. You're going to use ours, even though you didn't ask for this to be taken from you and you didn't want this. And the point that I'm bringing that up is it's that put yourself in their shoes. It's hard when you think about the Indians, because we think about, well, yeah, this land's always been ours. No, it hasn't. That's that whole Lance was talking about, like the pipeline and stuff. The thing I struggle with is it's not ours to take, right? We come in and we tell them we're going to use this. And it's like, well, wait a minute. No, it's not yours. It's not yours to take away from them. It's theirs, according to supposedly what we have signed and promised. It'd be like, think how mad the friendly redneck liberal folks would be if the government came and said, well, Lance, we really like your little piece of land here and we found some oil. So we're going to put a drilling rig in your field there, Lance. We're going to, and if you don't like it, well, that's too bad. We want it. And oh, by the way, we're not really going to give you anything for it. We're going to pay you pennies on the dollar, right, for this piece of land. And yes, folks, that is called eminent domain. If you're wondering, it is something that happens to law-abiding American citizens as well. But we have a long history of doing it, and doing it in a pretty terrible way to our indigenous tribes in this country.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Mexico because, and I know you know this because you had a fantastic history teacher.
I knew you were going to bring this up. That's
exactly what the United States did to Mexico.
Right.
All that land that you just talked about
was Mexico.
We invaded their country and took it and said, okay, now you have to do it our way. So It's interesting that you chose that chunk of land for your example. I do appreciate your example, though. We do understand that the scenario that you just gave happened in reverse.
Right, because the irony is that if they did that, they'd be taking back the land that we took from them. But
that was theirs originally.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
What we took from it. And once again, the Spanish, as well as the United States, took care of those indigenous tribes as well.
I just got to share, Lance. I was looking at the map of Oklahoma, in the article, and I kept meaning to bring it up, but we still haven't told our listeners. We haven't brought our producer up to speed either on the difference between charts and graphs. And I think the homework assignment for people should be they need to go look into that and see if they can figure out the difference between a chart and a graph. I'll tell you this. I'll give you a hint. All graphs are charts, but not all charts are graphs. And so we'll see if our producer Devin can figure it out right before the next episode.
You've explained this to me you've explained your theory a dozen times.
Not a theory.
I'm still confused.
It's the facts, Lance.
Okay.
It's the facts. I'm telling you.
You explained the facts to me over a dozen times, and I'm still confused on that. I don't know what I'm looking at, whether it's a chart or a graph, but at least I can decipher it and get the information I need from it, from which to base my argument.
So how to use it. Don't know what it is. I need. Got it. Okay. Speaking of which, if people want to do something, right? You've listened to today's episode and you're frustrated like Lance and I. Honestly, Lance, I believe this issue, it starts with the awareness because it's an unseen and therefore unheard situation. That's how our lawmakers prefer it, right? Out of sight, out of mind. If people don't know that we're doing this, we can just keep doing it and never have to do anything about it. And so the way that you change it first and foremost is doing things like what Lance and I did today. Make sure other people know. Because I think that's a powerful thing. I believe that there's a lot of good people in this country across the ideological spectrum. And when you really get them to understand just what we have done to these people and what we all collectively are responsible for allowing to continue to happen, I think that things start to change if people become aware of it. And so I think that's the first key. And that's part of what we're trying to do, right? At True Chat, Lance.
That's exactly right. We're trying to bring it to people's attention because how can people know that they need to do something if they don't know about it? And so that's part of the mission here at True Chat. And that is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And that's what we've had today. We don't have the power to make decisions, but we can get the word out. And then you, the American people, and our international listeners can put the pressure on the powers that be to do what we think is the right thing. And I say we, meaning all of us, because that's what happens when you live in a democracy, is that we, the people, get to speak and tell the government what we would like to see them do. And the key is that you need to get people to listen to us. If you've enjoyed the show and it's raised some questions for you, then tell your friends and your coworkers that they can find The State of Us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
A member of the Creek tribe and the first Native American to serve as Poet Laureate of the United States said, "The ruling, quote, reaffirms our personhood as a tribal nation. We had a very effective system of jurisprudence long before European systems were instituted and imposed on us. I see this ruling as an opportunity to understand and incorporate other approaches to governance, perhaps a step to heal the brokenness in this land." For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.